Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? Did you manage to clear your name, or does the shadow still follow you? For most of us, this is just a fear. But for Arthur Vance, this question became his reality. In the small town of Oak Creek, trust was a currency more valuable than gold. It was the kind of place where people left their front doors unlocked, where neighbors knew each other's dinner schedules, and where secrets were supposed to be impossible to keep. But on the night of November 14th, 2018, Oak Creek learned a painful lesson. Sometimes the monster isn't hiding in the shadows. Sometimes the monster is simply a figment of our collective imagination, a lie that grows so big it swallows a good man whole.
This is the story of Arthur Vance, a man who lost everything, not because of what he did, but because of what people feared he had done. Arthur Vance was a fixture in the community. At 42 years old, he was the senior history teacher at Oak Creek High. Unmarried, quiet, and deeply intellectual, Arthur lived a solitary life dedicated to books and his students. To the town, he was the harmless, slightly eccentric bachelor. He was the man who would stop to help you change a flat tire in the rain. There was no darkness in his past, no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. But normalcy is often the perfect canvas for a tragedy.
The night it happened, a storm was battering the county. Power lines were down, and the roads were slick with black ice. Sarah Jenkins, a 16-year-old sophomore known for her bright spirit, was walking home from rehearsal. She declined a ride from her friends, saying she needed the fresh air. She pulled her hood up, turned the corner onto Elm Street, and vanished. She never made it to her front door. By 11 p.m., her mother, frantic and terrified, had called the police. By midnight, the search parties had formed. Flashlights cut through the heavy rain. Voices called out her name, fighting against the roar of the wind. "Sarah! Sarah!" But the forest swallowed their cries.
In investigations like this, panic seeks a target, fear needs a face, and unfortunately for Arthur Vance, he became that face purely by accident. At 10:15 p.m., just 30 minutes after Sarah was last seen, a neighbor, Mrs. Gable, looked out her window. Through the pouring rain, she saw Arthur's car pull into his driveway. She noted something that would later become the cornerstone of the prosecution's theory. Arthur seemed rushed. He moved quickly from his trunk to his garage, carrying a large, heavy-looking bag. To a rational mind, it was a man carrying groceries or laundry in a storm. But to a town gripped by the terror of a missing child, it looked like disposal. It looked like guilt. Mrs. Gable didn't call the police immediately. She waited. But that single observation was the spark that would burn Arthur's life to the ground. When the police knocked on his door the next morning, Arthur was drinking tea, grading essays. He had no idea that his life as a free man had effectively ended the moment he parked his car the night before. Most people believe the worst moment of their lives will arrive with a bang. But for Arthur Vance, it arrived in a whisper. Sheriff Miller had known Arthur for years. That morning, the sheriff sat across from Arthur not just as a cop, but as a concerned acquaintance. But there was something off about the rhythm of the questions. "We just need to clear up the timeline, Arthur," the sheriff said. "Last night, during the storm, you went out?" Arthur didn't hesitate. He had nothing to hide. "Yes," he said, "I went to the laundromat. My machine at home broke down." It was the truth, but with a child missing, going out in a storm at midnight didn't sound like an innocent errand. It sounded like an opportunity.
The sheriff asked for permission to look at Arthur's car. Arthur handed over the keys, believing that cooperation would clear suspicion. It was his biggest mistake. Inside the trunk, they found the heavy bag Mrs. Gable had mentioned, which contained only folded clean laundry. They found a small shovel used for gardening. And third, a tiny red fiber stuck to the trunk's carpet, matted with mud. The day Sarah vanished, she was wearing a red sweater. That microscopic fiber likely fell off a grocery bag Arthur had bought months ago. But in the dim light of that garage, that fiber didn't shine like a clue. It shone like a confession. The police didn't arrest Arthur yet, but they gave him that infamous line, "Don't leave town, Mr. Vance."
Police procedures take time, but gossip travels faster than light. By noon, Mrs. Gable's statement had mutated. The telephone game had begun. He was always too quiet. Wasn't it strange he never married? I never liked the way he looked at the students. Every behavior that had been seen as Arthur's kindness was now being reinterpreted as the mask of a predator. The past was being rewritten. The blow came in the late afternoon. The school principal called. His voice was cold. "It's best if you don't come in until the investigation is resolved, Arthur." When Arthur hung up the phone, the silence of his home was deafening. When he peeked through his curtains, he realized it for the first time. People gathering on the sidewalk were staring at his house. There was no respect in their eyes anymore, only hatred. The hunt had begun.
By the third day, Oak Creek was no longer a quiet town. It had become a stage. Local whispers gave way to national headlines. The news channels needed a villain, and Arthur fits the profile. His mugshot was placed next to Sarah's innocent photo on every broadcast with the caption, "Teacher or Monster?" For Arthur, his home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a fortress under siege. He had unplugged the phone because the death threats never stopped. In the middle of the night, the sound that broke the silence wasn't thunder. It was the shattering of glass. A brick crashed through his living room window. When he stepped outside the next morning, a single word had been spray-painted in red across his garage door: "Killer."
Arthur didn't even try to scrub it off. He sank to his knees in the driveway. The physical violence had begun, and the police were merely watching. On the fourth day, Arthur was brought back to the interrogation room. This time, there was no tea. Sheriff Miller leaned over the table, desperate to break him. "You can't protect her anymore, Arthur. Just tell us where you buried her. Say it was an accident." Arthur, his voice weak and trembling, repeated the same three words. "I didn't do it. I cared about Sarah. I never hurt anyone." But the system doesn't hear a man saying, "I didn't do it." The system only hears words that fit its own narrative. A part of Arthur's soul died in that room.
They say time heals all wounds. But in Oak Creek, time had only scabbed over the wound. 3 years had passed. Due to insufficient evidence, Arthur never stood trial, but the court of public opinion had delivered its verdict. He had lost his job, his friends, and his dignity. He now worked nights at a gas station in a neighboring county, mopping floors, trying to be invisible. The whispers of "child killer" still haunted him. Then came November 2021. The sky turned dark, just like that cursed night 3 years ago. The wind began to howl. That night, Arthur was home alone. The police continued to monitor him routinely. A patrol car passed his house every hour. Arthur's whereabouts were certain. With the first light of morning, a bombshell dropped. But this time, the target wasn't Arthur. 15-year-old Emily Clark had vanished from her bed. Her window had been forced open, and in her room there were muddy footprints of the exact same type
found the night Sarah disappeared. Sheriff Miller looked at the reports, then at the clock. The math was simple. At the exact time Emily was taken, Arthur Vance was in his home, under police surveillance. The modus operandi was identical. In that moment, a nut tightened in the sheriff's stomach. The monster they had been chasing for years wasn't the quiet man mopping floors. The monster was still out there. While they were busy destroying an innocent man's life, they had allowed the real killer to roam free. The truth didn't arrive as salvation. It arrived as a wave of shame. When the truth finally came out, it brought shock. The culprit wasn't Arthur. The culprit was Jim Henderson, the town's beloved volunteer firefighter. The man who had joined the search parties. The man who had patted everyone on the back. Police found belongings of both Sarah and Emily in Jim's basement. Evil hadn't been hiding in Arthur's quiet home. It had been hiding behind Jim's reassuring smile. The town was ashamed. They scrubbed away the killer graffiti. Sheriff Miller went to Arthur's door. "We're sorry, Arthur," the sheriff said. "We made a mistake. You're free now." Arthur looked at the sheriff. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep exhaustion. "Free?" Arthur whispered. "Can you give me back my 3 years, Sheriff? Can you give me back the respect in my students' eyes? Can you erase that night from my memory?" The sheriff couldn't answer. Because justice can give you back your innocence, but it cannot give you back your life.
Arthur Vance didn't stay in Oak Creek. The school offered him his job back, but he refused. Neighbors left flowers, but he never took them inside, because trust is like a mirror. Once it's broken, you can glue the pieces back together, but the cracks will always remain. Arthur started his car and drove away without looking back. No one knew where he went. Arthur's story reminds us of a dangerous truth. You don't need a weapon to destroy a man. You only need a whisper, a prejudice, and a crowd too impatient to wait for the truth. So I ask you again, have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? Did you manage to clear your name, or does the shadow still follow you? I want to hear your story in the comments below. Let this be a safe space where the truth finally gets spoken. And who knows, maybe in our next video, you will find echoes of your own story. We read every single comment because your truth matters to us